The story of the Manson family is often told as a cautionary tale of manipulation, murder, and the dark side of the 60s. But at its core, it is also a story of belief, how Charles Manson managed to inspire unwavering devotion among certain followers, even in the face of his crimes and eventual imprisonment. In this video, we explore the lives of 3 individuals whose commitment to Manson's ideals shaped their paths long after the family's bloody rampage ended. Catherine "Cappy" Gillies, Catherine "Gypsy" Sher, and Steve "Clem" Grogan were drawn to Manson for different reasons, but all became what we might call true believers. For them, Charles Manson wasn't just a charismatic leader. He was a prophet, a revolutionary, or even a messianic figure. Steve Grogan, described as the family's most impressionable member, was so enthralled by Manson that he followed his orders to commit murder. Catherine Sher, known as Gypsy, took extraordinary risks to aid Manson after his conviction, including helping to orchestrate an armed robbery to fund a plan for his release. And Catherine Gillies, though never charged with any serious crime, remained steadfast in her loyalty, embodying the faith that defined so many of Manson's family. What makes the true believers stand out is their enduring faith in Manson's vision, even as the world around them recoiled in horror. Why did some followers eventually turn away, recognizing the danger they had been swept into, while others doubled down, clinging to Manson's philosophy despite overwhelming evidence of his cruelty and manipulation? This episode examines the psychology of belief, the allure of charismatic leadership, and the ways in which Manson's ideology sunk its claws so deeply into the hearts and minds of some that they could not or would not let it go. Catherine Louise Sher, later known as Gypsy, is one of the most fascinating figures connected to the Manson family. Born in Paris during World War II to Jewish parents in the French Resistance, she was orphaned as a toddler when both parents took their own lives. Later adopted by a French woman and her American husband, she was brought to California, only to lose her adoptive mother at age 16, leaving her to care for her blind stepfather. After leaving home, Catherine briefly married and lived in Connecticut before returning to California, where she became a folk singer under the name Charity Shane and cut a record in San Francisco in 1965.
When you see the little children play with guns, and you let them think that killing is fun, if you're too dumb to know the harm you've done, then you try bleeding in the sun.
By 1968, she had fallen on hard times and landed a small role in Ramrodder, an erotic western shot at Spahn Ranch, where she acted alongside Bobby Beausoleil. Intrigued by Bobby's talk of Manson, Cher was eager to meet the man who would soon dominate her life. He made me his woman right away. That's how it happened with all the new girls. After filming Ramrodder, Gypsy and Bobby traveled north with Gail, Bobby's other girlfriend, where they met 18-year-old Leslie Van Houten. Bobby invited Leslie to join them in their travels as a polyamorous foursome. Gypsy kept telling us about this wonderful commune near Los Angeles. Leslie remembered. I didn't know that Gypsy was scouting girls, pretty girls, or girls who had cars or cash. Leslie's first visit to Spahn Ranch ended in an argument between her, Gypsy, Bobby, and Gail. Gypsy and Leslie stayed, defecting to Charlie. At 26, Gypsy was the oldest woman in the family. She took on somewhat of a leadership role, particularly among the younger girls. Her recruiting paid off when she brought yet another person to Manson in the summer of 1969. That June 27th, Gypsy met 20-year-old Linda Kasabian at Charlie Melton's Topanga Canyon trailer. Linda, a New Englander, was staying with her husband Bob and 15-month-old daughter Tanya in Melton's trailer, confided her marital problems to Gypsy. That afternoon, Gypsy told her about Spawn Ranch. Linda left with her, bringing Tanya. Linda was comforted by the presence of other children, although surprised by the rule separating parents from kids. I was comfortable leaving my daughter because they had other children there, she said. By that summer, talk of helter-skelter had ramped up and contributed to the sense of desperation and danger that the family were immersed in. Gypsy later helped clarify exactly what helter-skelter was. She said, "It wasn't that Charlie listened to the White Album and started following what he thought the Beatles were saying. It was the other way around. He thought the Beatles were talking about what he had been expounding." Charlie talked about helter-skelter every night. The blacks would start burning white neighborhoods. Then the whites, who least behind them, would start killing blacks, and that would spark total chaos. We'd live in the desert. We'd be the saviors. I totally believed Charlie, Gypsy later admitted. I believed the cities were going to burn. I believed my only safety was to stay with the family. On the day of the moon landing, Gypsy and Brenda dropped a barrel of food down a hill. The lid broke off. Manson exploded. Charlie was kicking me and I rolled over into a ball, Gypsy remembered. He instilled terror. He had total control. After the murders, the arrests, and the grand jury, as the prosecution began plotting out the coming trial, Gypsy remained firmly on Manson's side and willing to do anything to prove her loyalty. That included terrorizing the woman who was initially to be the star witness at trial. Susan Atkins wrote, "Though I was supposed to be held incommunicado, Gypsy gets herself arrested and put on my floor of the jail to scream and yell at me for a day and a half. I was a snitch. I was dead." Gypsy also reminded Susan that her 2-year-old son, in Child Protective Services, was fair game. This harassment ultimately led Miss Atkins to repudiate her grand jury testimony, throw away her immunity deal, and switch allegiance back to Manson, an act that got her on death row. During the summer of 1970, during the build-up to trial, filmmaker Robert Hendrickson was at Spawn, making the documentary Manson. Gypsy was the de facto leader of the family during that summer, asserting that control by trying to manage the film. A few months later, during the trial, Gypsy was among those who participated in the conspiracy to poison Barbara Hoyt, another planned witness. On December 18, 1970, Gypsy was indicted with Squeaky, Clem, Steve Grogan, and others for the attempted poisoning of Hoyt. While in jail, she gave birth on January 5, 1971, to a son named Phoenix. The father was Steve Grogan. On August 21, 1971, months after the death sentence was imposed on Manson, Atkins, and others, Gypsy took part in the armed robbery of Western Surplus in Hawthorne, California, alongside Mary Bruner, Dennis Rice, and Kenneth Como, an Aryan Brotherhood member who escaped from prison and joined the family, attempting to gather weapons for a planned prison break. The heist failed. Gypsy and Mary were wounded, and everyone was arrested. In 1972, Mary and Gypsy were sentenced for the Hawthorne robbery and sent to the California Institute for Women, where Susan Atkins, Pat Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten were serving. They now belonged to Kenneth Como, Susan Atkins noted bitterly. Gypsy was released from prison a couple years later. In 1977, she married Como, who was still serving his own sentence. In 1979, she was convicted of theft and mail fraud on 6 counts, including interstate transportation of stolen goods. Authorities believed she orchestrated a complex fraud operation that defrauded merchants of more than $200,000. Using fake names and non-existent businesses, she arranged for expensive merchandise, rugs, jewelry, camera gear, gold, to be sent to locations in California and Oregon. Gypsy got caught and went back to prison. But eventually she got out and woke up. I was like everyone else, enslaved to the point I couldn't put 2 sentences together, she reflected. After prison, she rebuilt her life. Her son, who was in foster care while his mother was serving time, later served in the U.S. military. Catherine remarried and moved to Texas. She later reached out to Leslie Van Houten to apologize for introducing her to Charlie. Today, Catherine Sher identifies as a born-again Christian. She's spoken publicly about the dangers of manipulation, of groupthink, and the appeal of a charismatic leader. For years, she wrote a memoir, I Am a Gypsy Woman, which was not about her life in the family, but her years in contemplation after. She has not published that book. Catherine Sher remains a cautionary tale, but also, in some ways, a survivor. Steven Dennis Grogan was born July 13, 1951, in Chatsworth, California. He had recently dropped out of high school, so his frustrated parents sent him to Spahn Ranch to work as a stable hand. He started taking drugs with the family, participating in group sex, and totally embracing Charlie's wacky philosophies. Grogan was viewed as not too bright, possibly even mentally retarded, but in retrospect it seems that Clem, as he was nicknamed, was simply a very good puppet. Clem wasn't dumb, Paul Watkins clarified in his memoir. It was just that he adopted Charlie's program so completely that he became an idiot. The girls called Grogan Scramblehead. Steve Grogan told a later parole board about living at Spahn Ranch. They had a back ranch house that I lived in, and I worked odd jobs, guiding tours for writers and cleaning up the ranch. The rent was free. It was just an old shack. It had no electricity or hot water or anything, just a place to rest. Grogan left the ranch to stay with the family when they relocated to Death Valley in fall 1968 and returned to the ranch in early '69 with the others. On the 5th of April, Steve Grogan was arrested for prowling and grand theft of money. Then on May 20th, Clem was arrested for grand theft auto and released. 3 weeks later, on June 11th, Clem, aka Scramblehead, was arrested again, this time for indecent exposure. He was visiting his parents, and there were several schoolgirls nearby. His jeans had a hole near the crotch, his penis visible through the hole. An adult called the cops. Clem was charged with molestation. A few days later, he was sentenced to a local mental institution. He stayed 3 days and then walked away to return to Spahn Ranch. This begs the question, were police turning a blind eye to what was happening with the family? Grogan, a known associate of parolee Charles Manson, was arrested 3 times in 2 months. Did nobody look for him when he fled? Then, in August, Steve accompanied Manson and the killers to the home of Rosemary and Lino LaBianca. Tex Watson and Charlie went inside to tie up the owners, and when Manson came outside, he motioned for Pat Krenwinkel and Leslie Van Houten to go inside and do whatever Tex told them. He, Grogan, Susan Atkins, and Linda Kasabian drove away, with the intention to commit more murders, although inevitably the 4 returned to Spahn Ranch without killing anyone that night. 2 weeks later, however, Steve Grogan was one of several men who helped kill ranch hand Donald Shea, aka Shorty. Shorty had been a good friend to Clem. Eventually, the law caught up with the family. Grogan was one of the last convicted. In 1971, he was found guilty with Manson and Bruce Davis of murdering Donald Shorty Shea. He was sentenced to death, but the judge decided that Grogan was too stupid and drugged up to be fully responsible for his crime, and changed the sentence to life in prison with the possibility of parole. In 1975, while serving at Vacaville State Prison, Grogan married and fathered 2 sons. Later, he served at the Dual Vocational Institute in Tracy, California, where Grogan reconnected with Bobby Beausoleil. The 2 regularly performed music together while incarcerated. Then in 1977, Steve Grogan was stabbed by a fellow inmate. Scared, he offered to reveal where Shorty's remains were buried in hopes of gaining an early release. It didn't hurt that he had a brother in the California Highway Patrol. In 1981, Grogan spoke with authorities and identified the burial site of Shorty's body. Shay's remains were located finally in 1987. Grogan was freed from prison the following year, the first of only 2 members of the Manson family convicted of murder to go free. After his release, Grogan divorced his first wife and worked in the Sacramento area as a house painter. He married again to a psychologist and now performs as a musician. It is unclear whether he has a relationship with his first child, the son that Gypsy gave birth to. In the fall of 1968, while living at Spawn Ranch, the family met 17-year-old Catherine Irene Gillies. Gillies, originally from San Juan Capistrano in Orange County, was quickly nicknamed Capistrano by George Spahn, then shortened by the family to Cappy. Within a week of her introduction, Charles Manson learned that Cappy's grandmother owned a ranch in Death Valley, and he peppered her with questions about the property. Diane Lake remembered Cappy as a free spirit who was fun to be around. She had been a groupie who liked to hang out with Buffalo Springfield. That was about all I knew because after she mentioned the desert cottage, that was all everyone talked about. She was a miracle for the group and the hero of the hour. In her own memoir, Squeaky Frome described her as a talented caricature artist and generous storyteller. Other anecdotes were that she had dated a music producer before meeting the family, and she was self-conscious about her legs, preferring to wear pants over skirts. Cappy was indeed a free spirit, sometimes known for disappearing without notice those first few months. Therefore, initially, she wasn't fully trusted. Still, Manson was captivated by her stories of Myers Ranch. Within weeks, the entire family relocated to her grandmother's outpost near Trona. Death Valley was unlike any place the family had stayed before. Diane explained, Cappy's grandparents were part-time miners, but were likely part of the migration during the Depression, when many families sought to escape the food lines by establishing claims to land they perceived as the last frontier. Some people used the homes as a potential livelihood, or in later years as a retreat when they simply wanted to get away from city life. The mining life was not for everybody. Getting to Myers Ranch was an ordeal, taking hours to traverse the rough terrain. You don't want to be in those canyons when it rains, Cappy warned, unless you want to die. There's a reason they're called washes. Manson recalled his first view of Myers Ranch. It was a fair-sized dwelling surrounded by unexpected green vegetation, a nice little oasis in the middle of nowhere, a hell of a lot better than some of the places we had called home. But their stay was cut short when Cappy admitted she didn't have permission to be there. Her family could return any time. Looking for alternatives, Manson and Paul Watkins went into nearby Ballarat, where a local pantomath known as Ballarat Bob told them about Barker Ranch. Charlie found the owner, who agreed to let them stay there. Cappy remained with the family as they stayed in Death Valley for a month or two that fall of '68, and then back to Los Angeles, eventually resettling at Spawn Ranch in the spring of '69. Throughout it all, she remained loyal to Manson, and she stuck around. After the murders of summer '69, in desperation, the family fled back to Death Valley, splitting the gang between Myers and Barker ranches. In an effort to secure more permanent housing, Cappy Gillies allegedly offered to kill her own grandmother so she could inherit Myers Ranch. Charlie agreed and sent her with Zero, true name John Philip Hott, and one other man to commit the murder, but they got a flat tire and had to turn back. Weeks later, the family was arrested on suspicion of arson in Death Valley and soon implicated in the earlier murder spree. Most were released on the arson charges, however, before law enforcement connected the dots to the Tate and LaBianca murders. Hence, they were free, including Gillies. On November 5, 1969, several family members, including Cappy, Zero, Bruce Davis, Little Patty, and Cowboy Bill, were staying at a Venice beach house rented by actor Mark Ross. That day, Zero allegedly killed himself playing Russian roulette. He was in bed with Little Patty, spun the revolver with 6 bullets inside, and pull the trigger. When police arrived, the gun had been wiped clean. Bruce Davis's partial print was later found on it. Despite suspicions, police ruled it an accident and no charges were filed. Cappy remained a dedicated and loyal supporter of the family throughout the grand jury and trials. In 1972, she met Dave Red Barton, a biker from Texas. They married and had a son, settling in Trona near her grandmother's Death Valley estate. In 1974, Cappy was approached by FBI agents and police in Trona, suspected of hoarding weapons on behalf of the family. She showed them the old mine shaft on her property where the weapons were suspected, and none were found. She admitted to police that she still kept in touch with Squeaky and Sandy, who sometimes brought clothes for her little boy. Gillies and Barton had 3 more kids together before divorcing. He remarried. She did not. Cappy lived in Trona for many years with her family before moving to Oregon. She continued to do art, although many of her paintings were lost. Catherine Capistrano Gillies died on June 29, 2018, of cancer. The stories of Catherine Gillies, Steve Grogan, and Catherine Sher highlight the power of belief to shape the course of a life, for better or worse. For the true believers of the Manson family, faith in Charles Manson became a lens through which they interpreted the world, even when that lens distorted reality to the point of tragedy. For Steve Grogan, loyalty meant following Manson's orders no matter how heinous. For Catherine Sher, devotion led her to risk everything to secure Manson's freedom. And for Catherine Gillies, unwavering belief allowed her to carry Manson's philosophy with her, even as the world condemned him. What separates these individuals from those who broke free earlier of Manson's influence? Perhaps it was the depth of their personal connection to him, their willingness to see him as a savior rather than a man. Perhaps it was the absence of a support system outside the family, leaving them no lifeline to reality. Or perhaps it was the intoxicating pull of a belief system that promised meaning, purpose, and a sense of belonging in a chaotic world. The true believers of the Manson family remind us of the dangers of surrendering too much of ourselves to another person or ideology. Their stories serve as a stark warning about the human need for connection and the ease with which it can be exploited. As we reflect on these lives, we're reminded that belief is a powerful force, one that can inspire, transform, and in the wrong hands, destroy. For the true believers, the legacy of Charles Manson wasn't just a chapter in their past. It was a defining feature of their identities, casting a shadow over everything that followed. The Vietnam War loomed large over the 1960s, shaping the lives of countless young men who were sent to fight a conflict they barely understood. Many of these soldiers returned home carrying scars that were invisible but deeply felt. Post-traumatic stress, moral injury, and a profound sense of alienation from the country they had been sent to defend. For some, the America they returned to was unrecognizable, a nation in turmoil, grappling with civil rights battles, anti-war protests, and a countercultural revolution that rejected the very values they had fought to protect. In the next video, we will delve into the stories of 2 Vietnam veterans who found themselves orbiting the Manson family. These men, drawn to Spawn Ranch by its promise of freedom and belonging, were simultaneously repelled by the violence and control that Charles Manson wielded over his followers, and drawn into the profound connection that the family offered. We will also look at one young woman who seemed too fragile for the world, who briefly found respite in Manson's family, fought an inner war to walk away, and later married one of these veterans.